Is it avowed, or should we call it awowed? Even by my own standards, that's a pretty cheesy introduction. However, we're getting some early data that might suggest that Avowed is performing exceptionally well, right? We've seen good positive reviews over on Steam and 80 plus Metacritic. And one report is even saying there might be nearly 6 million monthly active users for Avowed during its release period. And considering the game only released about two-ish weeks ago in the middle of February, that would be pretty positive for Avowed right out of the gate. Now, it's important to keep in mind that especially on the Xbox side, engagement is a big thing that matters, and Microsoft is about as transparent as a muddy puddle when it comes to, well, basically any information that we want to know when it comes to Xbox. However, if we start to put together a lot of pieces, we can begin to see that Avowed might be like that shiny beacon that Xbox has been looking for a long time. Not that Indiana Jones wasn't as well, but when you pile these things on together, it looks like this might be a pretty big success. The question will be if it can hold on. Now, before we go any further, there's a lot of numbers we'll have to take with a grain of salt, including some of that 5.9, nearly 6 million monthly active users and other things. So just keep all that in mind. I'm just trying to provide a little bit of context and clarity, as I like to do whenever I see numbers being tossed around within the industry. So let's kind of dive in here. So the first thing that we know for a matter of fact is that over on Steam, there are 6,500 mostly positive reviews. And that's a general consensus of the reviews, is that the game is pretty darn good, well polished. It's not blowing up anything, and it's playable, and it's a good game. So that's obviously a very positive thing. So trying to do some data like how much does that turn into money? Like, how many sales is that? And the numbers are all over the place, that like 1 in 20 people might leave a review, and sometimes it's 1 in 50 might leave a review. There's no like standard average. However, if you take a relatively conservative estimate for how many people leave a review based on purchase, my guess is that on the low end, they may have made $9-ish million on Steam. I suspect it's higher than that. And on the high end, it would be about 23 million if you took the norms of the industry. And so I know those are huge numbers, or huge gaps in the numbers, fully aware. But again, without Microsoft actually telling us, just kind of keep those rough figures in mind as we continue to go through this. But however, there are a lot of people leaving reviews, which is always a good thing. Now, you can even jump over to the Steam charts, and it says, look, the all-time peak for roughly the past 7 days is 19,198 people. So that is well shy of a potential much larger population leaving reviews. So we don't, it's again, I'm just trying to throw some color in there based off the Steam charts about what the sales might be, which is why I think it's somewhere between that 9 and 23 number and not anything higher. But again, without transparency, and Microsoft typically doesn't say exact sales figures for anything on the gaming side. So, just take it with a grain of salt. However, one company has tried to put some real hard context to these numbers. Now, this is blowing up, grabbing headlines that, hey, Avowed had 5.9 million monthly active users in February, which is a phenomenal number, right? It's a phenomenal number. However, if you go off the numbers I just told you off of Steam, which I think on the aggressive end would be 330,000, that means a lot of people are playing this on the console or PC. Game Pass is also a potential another way that could be accessing this title. However, these are outside of purchases of your traditional, here's $70, please give me game mentality that we've seen pretty much up until the release of Game Pass. So here are their numbers, and I think we need to kind of pick these apart here. So first off, they're saying 5.9 million for Avowed, and then they base these numbers, and this is where it gets real weird. They base these numbers off of like search volumes, off of like streamer time, off of Steam charts, and all sorts of things. And so effectively, the TLDR is they put together their own algorithm that says this is what the numbers will be, and they're probably basing it on factual things we know. For example, Indiana Jones, that 4 million number was factual, and they also they don't quite know Call of Duty Black Ops. Again, they're estimated, but if you do this enough, you can actually at least put together a model, and that's what they are going off of here. And so they're grabbing a ton of headlines, and I don't know if that was intentional or just their normal operation of business, but we'll jump into that here in a second. But yeah, so let's go here for another step forward. So one of the things we do know is that Indiana Jones did 4 million. And I think, unless I misunderstood how everybody reacted to that number, everybody seemed to think that was pretty positive. Mindshare, which is the company that put together this chart, actually doesn't seem to think it's positive, but we'll get into that here in a second. However, Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, said 4 million players. That's why 4 million on this chart is probably the only like hardcore factual numbers. And then so what it looks like they're doing is they know Steam peak was at 12K. Call of Duty Black Ops obviously way above that, but like it's like, look, if Indiana Jones was at 12,000 peak on Steam and Avowed is at 19,000, and I did validate that the 12,000 is correct on the Indiana Jones, that's not hard to recognize that the CEO of the company is probably going to be pretty positive about Avowed because he was happy with Indiana Jones, and so this is 7,000 players higher, which would seem to indicate that the 4 million figure that they shared for Indiana Jones would be lower than what we're seeing for Avowed, right? So I think that might be how they primarily came to this 5.9 million figure number, and then tossed in some other hand-wavy things that don't really make too much sense. But again, they very clearly say estimate, because until Microsoft comes and shares that number, that is where we are at. So this slide is from a company called mindGAME, and even in their own slide deck, they really they dive into like why this number like may or may not be relevant, because Xbox is primarily targeting Game Pass. Remember, they tell us time and time again, judge us by our Game Pass subscription revenue and services revenue, not by our consoles and hardware sold. And so the question becomes here is if Avowed is considered a success. Now, I would point your eyes to the bottom one where it says without strong retention, because they're saying like, look, it may not have sold a ton of copies because somebody like myself could go get Avowed on my console, and I am not a sale. But if my engagement and retention of Game Pass maintains, or hopefully, we'd hope to see churn shrink because of this, then it would be considered a success. But they go on to say, but if Avowed sustained engagement through strong word-of-mouth DLC and eventual player release, it could still be a successful and shape the future of Xbox's strategy. I read the wrong line there. If you go up one, that's why my brain started melted. It said, if engagement drops quickly, Avowed may be seen as another underwhelming Game Pass title, similar to Indiana Jones, which had 4 million players and failed to meet expectations. So to me, that is a very odd bit of phrasing, because I thought, based on what Satya Nadella said, hey, we're pretty happy with what Indiana Jones did. I guess you could maybe interpret it, if you dig it out, that maybe he wasn't happy with only 4 million. I'm not quite sure, but according to mindGAME here, in their slides, like Indiana Jones was actually, in fact, not a success because engagement has not been sustained. But I think that's kind of like Indiana Jones is not a multiplayer title. You beat the game, yeah, you might go back and explore certain areas or try different side quests, but like it's not a Fortnite, it's not a Warzone or a Call of Duty or anything else that you jump into every night. Like you play the game, you got the story, and you moved on. And so they're starting to talk about like, is Avowed going to follow Indiana Jones where people don't stay engaged? We don't know. I think it's way too early, right? They can obviously add DLC, especially it seems like DLC for Avowed is going to be easier than an Indiana Jones at the end of the day, at least so far. But we'll see what eventually does ship. And that's an easy way for Avowed to bring people back in, right? You put a DLC out there, kind of like Starfield is doing, and then the engagement goes back up. Anyways, but you can imagine if you have a bunch of these titles where you can just drop DLCs, get people back in, they'll keep paying for subscriptions and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to go too far into that. But I just found it really interesting that they said Indiana Jones was not a success. The other thing that is very I don't know. They say that the budget for this game was $80 to $120 million. I don't know how they come to that conclusion. It seems reasonable, I guess. I don't know, right? We've seen titles like Halo Infinite where they're like 500 million, and then you have Avowed and they're 80 to 120. It seems very more estimated than factual, because again, I don't think Microsoft has ever shared that figure unless they have some insider source or something else giving them information. 80 to 120, which mind you is a very big gap of $40 million when you're only at 80. Doesn't matter. I wouldn't put too much weight into the 8120. My expectation is that it would have been higher than that, but we don't really know. Maybe because there's no multiplayer component, that is in fact a little bit closer to what we would expect. So Here's the other thing. Here's the other thing that I think everybody should take away from this. So the company that put this together is called mindGAME Data. And I'm not trying to knock any company that's new and upcoming, right? That is, every company has to start somewhere. However, I will point out that I had never heard of them prior, and I looked into them for more than 5 seconds, and they are a very new company, right? They were formed in September 19th of 2023. So the company is called mindGAME Data, and I think their information they put out, they call it mindshare. And clearly, they're a new company trying to make some waves. And how would you do that and say, hey, that new hot game from Microsoft, that's a way to over embellish some of the things that we're hearing potentially, and maybe that's how they get their name out there through all this information, because they very much appear to be an analyst style firm, and this is how they make their money, is by selling this kind of data. And so, yeah, I'm not saying this 6 million is wrong, and I'm not trying to dump all over Avowed and say like, no, it's not actually 6 million. I just want to point out that for any listener out there who's watching this, that like, hey, just be mindful of, I didn't mean to be mindful of mindshare and mind data or whatever else. So just because a number's in the headline, you should just look beyond it. Just look beyond it, because if Indiana Jones at 4 million wasn't a success, I find it that Avowed would not be a success. I don't know. It seems like it's doing well. It seems like it's well loved, and it seems like it has a better future. So maybe that's their point. Anyways, I just wanted to kind of point those little data points out to make you just a little bit smarter. And as always, my friends, make sure to keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this channel is me.